Hi, I'm Mary Robinette Kowal, and I'm here to talk to you about how to do a reading. We're going to speed through this. Now, and if you've ever been to a reading, that sometimes the writer is the worst person to read their own text because they just kill it. Fortunately, most of the things that make a reading bad are things that are easy to fix. They are volume, speed, and droning. All of those are easy things. Volume is literally how loud you are. And I could talk all day about diaphragm placement, but the truth is that you already know how to be loud. Your body knows how to be loud. So this is how you project. We naturally calibrate our voices to the space that we're in. What happens to most people unconsciously when they're doing a reading is that they adjust their voice for the front row. What you're going to do when you're doing a reading is you're going to talk to the back of the theater. We listen for something that's called the slap, which is literally the sound of our voice slapping off the back wall. If you are using a microphone, use it. Even if you know that you can fill the room, microphone is often very useful for someone who has hearing challenges, and it makes it more accessible. Not all microphones are created equal. There's a huge range in what they can do. If you have an opportunity, test the microphone. You don't always get that opportunity when you're in like a slam setting or something. You've got things like sibilants or plosives. These are anything that involve a puff of air. Fortunately, these are very easy to avoid. The easiest way to describe this is this. Face the microphone, then hold your index finger in front of it and blow as gently as if you were blowing out a candle. So if you can feel your breath on your finger, then it's going to hit the microphone. Pop, pop. Okay. So you turn your head just far enough that you can't feel your head on your finger. Your voice is still going to be captured by the microphone, but the breath is going to pass by it. Also will pass by it if it's over it. If you're aiming directly at it, it will be louder, but you do have to be more careful about those plosives. But basically the thing is, don't blow on the microphone and don't shout. You're already amplified. Speed. When you are reading, the words are familiar to you. You are also filled with adrenaline. So you're going to rush without meaning to. Unlike in a textbook or even an audiobook where the listener can back up, an audience at a live reading cannot. So you have to slow down. As a bonus, if you are asked to do a reading, there's a handy trick. The goal you should be going for is 150 words per minute, which means that you can divide your number of words by 150 words and know how long a reading is, or you can multiply your allotted time by 150 words to know how many words your selection should be. So for instance, if you're told that you can do a 2-minute reading, that means 300 words. Droning. What happens to a lot of people is that they start focusing on pronouncing things correctly. Inadvertently, they strip the story of all meaning. This is what leads them to drone because effectively they're just giving a list of words that happen to be arranged in grammatical order. But humans are animals. As soon as we recognize a sound, we are hardwired to tune it out so we can focus on the dangerous stuff. Writing developed to convey the spoken language. So don't forget that you are telling a story and need to speak naturally. Again, this is something that your body knows how to do. Think about the meaning and tell the story. So if you can avoid those 3 mistakes, you are ahead of the game. If people can hear you, if you're not rushing and you're not droning, you're doing great. But let's talk about moving to the next level. So when we want to move to that next level, what we're looking at is our selection. This is where most people go wrong. That's where you want to start. You want to pick a story or an excerpt from a novel and make it sure that it's something that's suitable for being read aloud and fits your voice. That's generally about a small cast of characters, a self-contained scene, and good for your particular voice. So what do I mean by a small cast of characters? The more characters you have, and the narrator counts as one, the harder it will be to vocally distinguish between them. Unless you're Mel Blanc, 4 characters, including the narrator, is probably your safe upper limit. This is going to vary, obviously, But within that cast, it will be easier if your characters are also disparate in terms of type. For instance, a woman and a man are easier to distinguish than two women. You're also going to look for a self-contained scene so that your audience gets beginning, middle, end, even if it's part of a larger whole. Now, if you are doing a reading to sell your book, there is something to be said for ending on a cliffhanger, but make sure that it's a real cliffhanger and not just a random stopping place. What I recommend doing is actually starting at the middle. Pick that first. What's a really great, juicy thing that you want the audience to hear? You're going to spend your bulk of the time reading that. So pick it. Then where are you going to stop reading? It doesn't have to be the end of a scene. You're just looking for a line that kind of adds a button. And then you back up using the 150 words per minute rule, back up and find a good entry point. And then you can write an intro to guide the readers in. And just as a note, it's okay to edit your text for the reading. If there's a chunk of description that your audience doesn't need to understand the selection that you're reading, you can skip that. You can jump all the he says and she says. You can do those with your voice. That's fine. So you can edit it for the reading. Then you're also looking for something that suits your voice. You've picked a story that's going to sound good read aloud, but are you the right person to read it? If it's a first person story, it helps if you match the gender of the narrator, or your audience is going to have a hard time getting past the audio cues. Now, having said that, it is also totally okay to just tell the readers, the listeners, hello, I am going to be reading something that was written in the point of view of a 79-year-old man. I am not. They're fine. They will go with you on that. But even in a third person story, you need to be aware that the narrator voice will often echo the thoughts of the main character. So picking a selection where the gender matches is just going to be easier on the audience. There are people who can get away with cross-gender roles, but it's not easy. Just know your limits and choose the thing that fits most comfortably for you. So then we have telling the story. This is getting into it and making it sound amazing. We have a couple of things we look at there to elevate. There's the narration itself, the character voices, and our connection to the audience. So narrating is at once the easiest part of reading aloud and the hardest. It's the easiest because you don't have to worry about character voice or distinction. Or do you? You do. That's why it's one of the hardest parts. The narrator is a character in your story, and they're the one that needs to connect to the listener. The voice needs to be distinctive enough that when you say a line of dialogue and then return to the narrator, the audience recognizes the voice. At the same time, it can't distract from the story by being so distinctive that it overshadows the words. When we're talking, there's a number of different shadings that happen with our voice, most of which have to do with something called attitude. Your voice changes subtly depending on whether you're talking to your mother or your boss or your lover or answering the phone. So I sometimes use what I call my phone voice, but these days no one answers the phone without knowing who's on the other end of them anymore. But that's the one where you're like, hello, my name is Mary Robinette. It sounds professional, a little bit neutral, and slightly more modulated than your hanging out with chums voice. On the other hand, if your narrator is in a hanging out with chums kind of tone, maybe that's the voice you use. Now, I'm going to give you some very rough, basic rules to start with. We've talked about speaking slower than you should, but one of the things that I want you to know about is this little exercise. Do not feel like you need to do this for always. This is a learning technique. You're speaking slower than you think you should, aces, but punctuation exists to record all of the natural pauses that we do when we're speaking. Remember, writing developed to convey the spoken language. So when you're looking at a piece of text, a comma means a pause and count to 1. A period means a pause and count to 2. And a paragraph means pause and count to 3. I'm going to use a little bit of Ray Bradbury to show you what that looks like. So I'm going to quickly read the first little bit here without doing those pauses. William Acton rose to his feet. The clock on the mantel ticked midnight. He looked at his fingers and he looked at the large room around him and he looked at the man lying on the floor. Okay. It's fine. Everyone can understand what I'm saying. But here we go. William Acton rose to his feet. The clock on the mantel ticked midnight. He looked at his fingers and he looked at the large room around him and he looked at the man lying on the floor. William Acton, whose fingers had stroked typewriter keys and made love and fried ham and eggs for early breakfasts, had now accomplished a murder with those same 10 whirled fingers. So you see how just adding those pauses opens the text up. It's a really simple thing to do, and it's a good way to practice. Practicing narration, especially when your kerning is off. But let's talk about the really fun stuff. Each sentence has a word or phrase that is the most important thing, and you can focus the listener's attention by placing emphasis on that. Placing emphasis can be as simple as putting a stress on that part of the sentence, the same way that you put a stress on the accented syllable of a word. So again, looking at this first sentence of that second paragraph of Bradbury, he looked at his fingers and he looked at the large room around him and he looked at the man lying on the floor. What's the most important thing in that sentence? Probably the man lying on the floor. So what you do then is you underline it to remind yourself when you get there that you're going to put a slight emphasis on it. He looked at his fingers and he looked at the large room around him and he looked at the man lying on the floor. And what's the most important word? Probably man. That would be my bet. So a slight line goes under it. But here's the interesting thing. Any answer would have been correct there because it depends on what you, the reader, think is the most important word. He looked at the man lying on the floor. He looked at the man lying on the floor. He looked at the man lying on the floor. All of those are correct depending on the effect you're trying to go for. So now we're going to talk about character voices. First of all, you do not have to do them. But the goal with a character voice is not to sound like a full cast, but to make it easy for the listener to recognize who's speaking. The human voice is very flexible, and we're going to look at ways you can manipulate it. Remember, though, the voice is a muscle, and you can strain it just as easily as you can hurt an ankle. So if you're trying something and it hurts, stop. Here's your toolbox for character voices: pitch, placement, pacing, accent, and attitude. Pitch, pretty self-explanatory. It's just how high or low your voice is. You can check your range by just humming from your highest note to your lowest note. Of that, you probably use the middle most while speaking. It can help color a character, but it's not a good idea to rely on pitch alone to distinguish characters simply because you use more than one note when you're speaking. Placement is about where your voice is resonating. There's several resonators which affect the tone of a voice. So put your hand on your chest and with the other hand, put it on your nose. And now hum through your range again. As you do, you'll feel your body vibrate at different times. Those are the resonators. Now, I can get technical about larynx and pharynx and oral cavity and nasal cavity, or we can talk about common experiences. The facial mask has multiple resonators, which you mostly notice when you have a sinus infection. Ever wonder why you sound nasally when you have a cold? That is why. You can also move your voice from the front of your mouth to the back of your mouth. Broadly speaking, Russian tends to be at the back of the mouth, while British English tends to be fairly far forward. So this is one of my favorite things. We're going to start with the nasal cavity because it's one of the easiest things to find. So you're going to hold your nose and you're just going to go and just try to get your nose to buzz. That's it. There you go. Now you have a character voice. Congratulations. So now I want you to lift your soft palate and yawn and then talk. Hello there. Now I have a second character voice. I mean, sure, that one's kind of goofy, but it does let you know that there are some things you can play with. There's a whole bunch more, but the thing I want you to remember is it doesn't have to be really exaggerated. It's just to help the reader and listener understand who's talking. And then we have pacing. This covers everything from how quickly a character speaks to the types of rhythms that they use. Is their voice quick but fluid, or is it staccato? Slow and halting, or does it drawl? Generally speaking, a reminder, always speak lower than you think you should. Then we have accent. If you have a character who has an accent, make sure you can do it convincingly. There's really nothing worse than hearing someone butcher an accent. But accents are made up of multiple things: pronunciation, rhythm, placement. If you can get the rhythm, often you don't need to worry about the pronunciation. You don't need to worry about whether it is bath or bath. And then attitude. This is your most powerful tool. You can tell on the phone if someone's smiling, right? Technically, it's a combination of all the things we've talked about, but fundamentally, it's about attitude. If you know your character, then you know how they'll speak. Take the phrase, "What did you say?" Now say it as if you're angry. "What did you say?" Or curious. "What did you say?" Disbelieving. "What did you say?" All of these are attitudes. So just a reminder, here's your basic tools: pitch, placement, pacing, accent, and attitude. And now, connecting to the audience. These are all fun tools that you can use. Connecting to the audience is all about helping them understand the story. The first place we start is our introduction. If you're doing an excerpt, write it. Don't improvise on the spot. People have a tendency to repeat themselves when speaking extemporaneously. Besides, you're a writer. Make it as short as possible and in the same general tone as your story. In other words, don't be funny and then dive into a post-apocalyptic horror. You should probably also memorize it so it sounds like you're speaking off the cuff, or have notes jotted to yourself. If you're working with a book, I want you to keep it closed while you're giving the introduction. Let me grab a book and I'll show you what I mean. So here I've got a book. I'm going to keep it closed while I talk to you about my book, Shades of Milk and Honey, which is Jane Austen with magic. Then, when you're ready, you can open the book, and that signals to the audience, I have begun the actual story. This provides a clear signpost to the audience that the story is beginning. Focus. Pick a point on the back wall that represents each character. When you speak for that character, you look at that point on the wall. This, in addition to your voicing, gives your audience instant cues about who's speaking. This is especially handy in rapid exchanges. It also means that you get to use their eye contact with other characters to add another level of performance. So, for instance, had you heard that Lady Fitzcameron's nephew has been stationed in our town? No. Jane adjusted her shawl. They must be pleased to see him. So you can see that little back and forth helps just a little bit. And then body language. Don't worry, I'm not going to suggest that you have to get into heavy acting. You're not doing a one-person show off Broadway, but subtle shifts in body language can help your audience identify characters and add another level of emotion to your performance. One of the things that it can also do is help you remember what character voice you're doing. So maybe you have someone who talks like this and another one who talks like this. These are just things to help. And then we get to the end. So what you're going to do is you're going to say your last line. What did you speak of while I was acting like a fool? Lower your head, close the book, and take a slight step back. That signals to your audience that you are done. Shockingly, that is often all you need to cue them to clap. Good luck. I hope you have fun reading.